Hi everyone, David Paparelli here, co-founder of M-Cultivo, and welcome back to the Cupping Table podcast, where we talk to the best coffee producers and the best coffee buyers in the world to get their stories, outlook, and insights on the specialty coffee space. Today we have a very special episode because I'm live here in London with Nick and Fred from the Kula Project. They run a coffee operation out of Rwanda, and they are doing some amazing things and have garnered some amazing learnings that they're sharing with us today. So let's not waste any time and let's dive right in.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. And thank you for being live in-person podcast number 2.
Love it.
For the Cupping Table. It's unbelievable to actually be able to do this. So welcome to London.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So on these things, I usually start off with an easy question, which is just what's the best cup of coffee you've had recently?
Well, I mean, just this last week up in Oxford, I had a really good Colombian geisha that was lovely. So I'll go with that.
What do you think, Fred?
Yeah, same here. I've been together in the conference, so I think geisha still stands out for me.
Colombia geisha. Yes. I did serve you guys a Panamanian geisha today. I'm kind of disappointed to make the list, but I'm not going to hold that against you. So I'd love to get I want to catch up on what you're doing in the UK a little bit. But before we get into that, it would be great to get just a broad overview of Kula and all the work that you guys have going on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. And thanks for having us. We're thrilled to be here. Essentially, Kula exists to support coffee farmers out of poverty. And so just kind of working in the reality of, amidst the amazing world of coffee that we all know and love, obviously the reality is that so many farmers are still at the very bottom of the value chain, and globally there's still a lot of those farmers that are living below the poverty line. And so our work is focused in Rwanda with coffee farmers to really significantly increase their income. So our main way of doing that is through yield increases in their crops and additional revenue streams to supplement their coffee businesses. And that's kind of specific to a very small holding farmer context in Rwanda. And so our main work is through a fellowship program that brings farmers through a curriculum of in-depth agriculture training and inputs, coupled with business development training and access to finance as well. So we really see through that process that farmers are able to double, triple their incomes, heavily increase their yields per tree as well, and really see that significant income increase. And so that's the bulk of our work and how we kind of address, working with farmers to really see their lives change.
Is the whole thing, Fred, is it all coffee farmer focused with Kula, or are there other programs, initiatives that you guys have taken on over the years as just a broader nonprofit organization?
Well, thank you. Ultimately, it's been coffee from day one. We've been there to support the coffee sector in Rwanda because currently the coffee trees in Rwanda are not producing to its capacity. So our job has been to see how we can increase the harvest, both by providing the good varieties of seedlings just to speed up the production, as well as farm-based practices in order to teach farmers in Rwanda how to grow coffee well, just to maximize. In Rwandan perspective, the coffee farmers grow coffee on kind of small land holding structure.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're working with these coffee farmers, right? I think you guys work with over 1,000. Is it over 1,000 coffee farmers? Is it more than that now?
It's more than that. And at the specific washing station that we own and operate, it's about 1,000 farmers a season. And then outside of that, in other regions around the country, we're typically working with 300 households per year through our kind of more in-depth fellowship program. And then we're growing that up over the next few years. So it's typically 1,300 to 1,500 farmer households per year.
What the fellowship program, what's the ultimate goal of that fellowship program?
It's income increases above the poverty line. So most farmers that we start working with are, again, if we're looking at the World Bank definition of poverty, which is an imperfect metric, but it is one of those metrics out there, and they define it as $2.15 per person per day that someone is living off of. And most of the farmers that we're working with are at earning around 25 to 50 cents per person per day in their households. So there's a significant gap between what their income is, even though they are coffee farmers already, and what would see them be above that poverty line. So it's really looking intensively at what best support we can provide to really see their incomes increase.
Yeah, and you mentioned the $2.15 per day. I remember when it was $1 a day, 15 years ago or 20 years ago or something like that. What's made that? I mean, that's these metrics get thrown out and just kind of accepted as like, oh, okay, this has been. Surely it's $2.15 a day in Rwanda and Uganda and Peru. It could be the same, right? But obviously it's completely different context. Why? What are some of the reasons why that's imperfect but helpful for you guys to use as kind of a base?
Yeah, and again, it is imperfect, and there are various metrics that get used. I mean, it is a lot of global economic practices to understand inflation rates, how to convert different countries' realities into one universal currency, which is currently the dollar, and how to understand, again, with currency exchanges and inflation rates and how that changes over time, essentially to say, like, what is the value of $2.15 in various countries around the world, and what that means for how a family can live and sustain themselves in various categories, whether it's the food that they're eating, access to education, access to healthcare, those kinds of things. So that, again, imperfect, but one metric that when using various conversion metrics that, again, the World Bank and the IMF provide, every country has another conversion metric that you would put in that $2.15 per person per day that would then relate to the local currency and understanding what the value of that is. So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, and I can assure you there's so much that you could dive into that would both give some clarity and also confuse you more. But again,
do you think, Fred, when you're just on the ground in Rwanda, I mean, and you think of $2.15 a day, that's what in Rwandan francs? What would that be?
That's around 3,500.
Yeah, I'm asking you to do math on the spot, but so in Rwandan francs, in that aspect, do you think that does that seem like the poverty line in Rwanda? If you're making $2.15 per day, the families that you meet, the people that you meet on the ground, does that feel like a real hurdle?
Yes, Liz, because I think with 3,500 Rwandan francs per day, if you look around like an average household in Rwanda, they have like from 4 household members to 6. So 3,500 is literally less to make a household to survive for a day with kind of like the current inflation. So I agree with $2.15 per day as below poverty line.
Yeah, and it would be, but it could be $3 next year.
Yes.
The way things are going in the world.
True, but it will still be less depending on the basic needs. But in Rwandan context, we realize that most of the food crops, some of the consumptions are grown by the farmers in the village, so they buy less. But again, you put into the account the sizable land, the farmable land. So that still brings in the issue of $2.15 or $3 being less compared to the household.
Yeah, there's all this I mean, you're bringing it up there of I'm sure people are growing their own food, right? I'm sure people are bartering to get food, and it's hard to kind of really track all this down. You get into this with coffee with cost of production. It's are you measuring the labor that goes into the farm? So what is the profitability of one of these farmers, and how do you get to that number? Is that even possible in order to come to the calculation of, we've 3x their revenue or we've 3x their income, right? Is it that simple?
Yeah. I mean, I think few things, unfortunately, are that simple. But again, I think there's a lot of various ways to look at it, and a lot of ways that can be valuable. And I think, for us, through a lot of conversations internally with our team, we have kind of come to this somewhat uneasy, but like better than others that we've tried spot of saying, at least this can be like a guiding light to help drive some clarity and focus for what we're trying to do. And again, if 215 is that marked, is the difference between 214 and 216 so different that it can be like, now they're out of poverty? And no, 100% no. And I think there's some interesting work being done by different organizations and different thinkers that are always trying to challenge that metric. And the reality of poverty is that it is much more than one economic indicator. When someone is poor or classifies themselves as poor, there's a lot of different things that go into it rather than just one economic metric. At the same time, I think for organizations, it is helpful and at points necessary to have clarity on what those goals can be. And I think that drives, for us, it's been very helpful to drive what we're doing and where we can really put our focus and energy and efforts to have clarity of where we're going and how we can measure success one way or another. Does that mean that, when we work with a family and their income gets to $2.10, we failed? I certainly don't think so. And when they get to $2.20, it's 100% arousing success? Not necessarily, but it does provide a helpful indicator. And I do think that for us, again, in the context of coffee and in Rwanda, it is to say so often, even when, again, for the context of Rwanda, when a washing station maybe has a good contract and is selling coffee at a high price, more often than not, the benefits don't trickle down to the average farmer, and farmers are still earning maybe $1 a day. And that's where we would be like, okay, so our goal isn't just like higher prices for farmers. There's a lot more that needs to go into this to really see incomes increase, because we do feel like that's significant.
Well, there's always, and we tell farmers this all the time at high level, is there's everybody focuses on revenue because it's an easy thing to focus on. The C market price, easy thing to focus on in coffee because it's just, this is the number, $2.15 as the poverty line.
Yeah.
Easy to focus on that because it's like, oh, this is a good metric or number. But it completely ignores, in most cases, when these folks are running micro enterprises, if you want to call them that, the expense line or the cost side of the equation. The example that we get to is we run auctions, right? People get crazy high prices in those auctions. Yes, that does happen. Several $100s a kilo in some cases. What did it cost to produce that coffee, though? Would you ever advise a farmer to actually go grow, rip out all their trees and plant a geisha varietal because they make more money doing it? Yeah. And you guys are dealing with that on a household level, I'd imagine, where, have to have some other kind of data points you need to place in the cost side of that profit and loss statement for that household to say, okay, yeah, this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. Right. And I think so often people are just saying, okay, well, we increased revenue. It's like, well, yeah, but the margin was reduced for that household, so they're actually worse off.
Yeah.
Are you guys seeing that on the ground with some of the interventions that you guys have been a part of or other people have been a part of? What hard lessons have you learned around that?
Yeah, actually, what I can say about that, I think currently, like in Rwandan perspective, farmers are growing coffee on a small space, and the coffee trees are not producing to its capacity. So the initiative that have been there was for us as Kula Project is to reduce a lot of input as well as maximizing the output. How do we do that? We provide a good variety of seedlings. You're talking about the geisha. We haven't yet started preparing it, but I think that's where we can think of it, including it among the varieties we do prepare. Two, there is a lot of researches going on, like IPM kind of research to reduce the application of pesticides and use materials that are available in their communities. affordable and available, which will trigger the harvest. Plus, we are also teaching, we are providing the livestock and teaching the soil composting in order to produce organic with the minimum of input. So I feel like once the farmers start testing the maximum production, they will pick the interest. From there, they will start exploring more other varieties they can plant that can produce the maximum input, which can bring high return.
Yeah, and so you go ahead, Nick.
No, I would just say, I mean, I think for most farmers in Rwanda and even washing station owners, if they're independent owners or cooperative owned, they're still operating largely in a bit of a bubble compared to the global conversation around processing methods, varieties. There's a lot of restrictions and regulations in Rwanda as well. So any new variety has to go through a lot of Rwanda Agriculture Board testing and approval. So currently, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's only like 3 varieties that have been approved by RAB to be grown on a large scale. Geisha definitely is not one of them. So there's limited things that farmers have access to and are able to do, and the general through line of recommendations is, if you have money to put into inputs, it's directed through chemical fertilizers and pesticides that are provided by the government. Some are subsidized, some are given to farmers, some are available for farmers to purchase. But really, I think for most farmers, the mindset is, if I do have any money to invest in this, I'm going to invest in these very standard, typical ways that maybe could result in some yield benefits. A lot of our curriculum and focus of our program is supporting more of a regenerative agriculture approach. And so finding inputs and training methods that are both regenerative and healthy for the soil and the land, but also more cost effective for farmers to do. So, I mean, a couple things that we're focusing a lot on is IPM research, like Fred has mentioned, to find some more really cost effective organic pesticides that farmers can be using. One thing that we've been trialing and now we're rolling out with all the farmers is biochar, and providing really low cost biochar kilns for farmers to be able to create that soil amendment, and then providing livestock for organic fertilizer manure, essentially. But kind of seeing those as like these really basic level, but cost effective and sustainable ways for farmers to put more investment in their farms, but not a cost investment one. But I think, when we talk about the shifting to a new variety, shifting to a new processing method, I honestly feel like a lot of that conversation is kind of actually missing the reality of Rwandan farmers, and that's not even in the conversation yet at this point. It's really like very basic inputs and what has been available that is also expensive and not the healthiest for the soil, versus what can be some more cost-effective and long-term sustainable inputs for them.
And you're mainly talking about, basic farm management.
Yeah, very basic
that sort of
farm
thing.
management. Yeah.
So what's when you think about how, if you think about Kula's impact portfolio, right? And you say, okay, well, and I'm making up these numbers, so you correct me on this, but 25% education based, training, education, 25% agricultural inputs, resources, like we're going to put hard goods, 25%, financing, cash, that sort of thing. Yeah. And, maybe it's another 25% infrastructure, access to market. Like, how does that, I made up every single one of those numbers to get to 100%, but how does that actually balance for you guys? Where do you guys find yourself spending the most time to get the most, benefit for the farmers that you work with? Any thoughts on that, Fred?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think majority of our time is spent on the education and the input. Education, our training model is based on group training and one-on-one kind of deep focus. Then it goes with farm input and business input just to help implementation of the trainings. Then there is a piece of financing just to make sure that they've been trained on, what they are thinking to come up with is just putting into the action, and it is starting.
Yeah, I think we still see a lot of value and put a lot of focus on that, the coaching piece. I think that goes with the training, because it is group training, and then there's a lot of one-on-one follow-up, both in the business development side and on-farm training, but both. So for our teams, it's agronomists and business coaches that the agronomists are doing, again, both group, but also farm follow-up to really do best practice training, but then also business coaches to work with households to think about how they're seeing themselves as entrepreneurs, what their family goals are, what they want to, what their vision is for increasing their income. And then through that, how they can both be thinking about their coffee farms as a business, but also thinking about additional revenue streams to supplement their coffee businesses as well. Kind of through the reality of, again, specific to Rwanda, very densely populated country, small amount of land available. For most farmers that we work with, when they come into the program, they have 200 to 300 trees, like a quarter of a hectare of land. And maybe they'll be able to double that over a few years, but that will probably be the max land-wise that they can get to. So it's, again, to get to those significant income increases that would be above the poverty line, realistically, they would need both to really maximize their farm production, but also start additional small micro enterprises to really get their income increase.
Yeah, so it's sort of maximize coffee, but then, hey, you really need to look at other things potentially, and that's where sort of the wider Kula solution kind of comes into play.
And more entrepreneurship and access to finance to get new businesses off the ground as well. So and that can be a ton of different things. We've had fellows start beekeeping businesses, carpentry businesses. A lot of other, animal rearing or other type of agriculture crop businesses, barber shops, some bars, some beer making, like so many different things that we see as like vital to creating these more vibrant kind of economies in their very localized communities.
Yeah. I always feel, that's maybe one more question on impact and then love to talk about coffee. But I always feel like we come up with these theory of change exercises or something, right? Of, hey, these are the inputs, and then this is how these resources are managed. These are the outputs. These are the outcomes. This is the impact. And you kind of flow that through. And then this is Kula's theory of change. And then that's kind of what people donate to or they invest in to kind of get some sort of, get to that impact equation. Has that simplified for you guys over the years, or has it just kind of continued to build and get ever more kind of complicated? So that would be one. And then the other part is I'd be super curious of how Rwandans on the ground view these sort of almost academic exercises of like theory of change. And then this is how we're going to, actually change Rwanda. If it's just sort of like, okay, we'll go along because that's sort of, where the money comes from, or if there's a core belief in what's happening there. What do you think, Fred?
Well, in Kula context, I would say the theory of change, specifically to me, when we started talking about having this kind of deep discussions, was something really new to me. We gave it a shot and we were like, let's try it out. We don't know the outcome. It was kind of like try and error method. We discussed about it, of course, helped by Nick. Then we launched the first fellowship. It was very success, and we were like, wow, this is working. Now let's dive deeper and design the metrics, the KPIs and KPAs. What's the success are we looking for? How are we gonna measure it? What's the impact we are targeting versus the input you're putting in? That's how we kept working on it. Even in the last fellowship, we took some time off to revise that theory of change, the fellowship. That's why it is now 12 months with specific targets. We developed our first curriculum, both agronomy curriculum and household entrepreneurship curriculum for both our farm trainers and business coaches. We feel like now we've been there for some time. We know what we want. We know how to get it. And we have like at least the materials, the documents to use to guide the coachings and trainings going on.
Do you guys ever get stuck in this where, okay, we came up with this idea of what needs to be done. They call that a theory of change, right? Or one portion of that for Kula. And then somebody comes along and says, I'm going to donate a bunch of money to that. That sounds great. Let's do it. And then you start doing it, and then you realize, well, this isn't working, or we need to pivot. And it's very clear to the entire team, but you can't. You're like, well, yeah, but they gave us this money to dig 100 wells, so we have to dig the wells. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Like, how do you manage that? How does that work in reality?
Yeah, I mean it's great conversation. We are just coming from this last week being at the Skull World Forum in Oxford, and there's so many conversations going on about this, which is fascinating because my career, which is always funny to me when I say my career, but I guess I have a career now. But my career for like the last 17 years has been in this world, and it feels like to some extent, while things have matured, there still is that same conversation of like top-down implementation and doing things because funders are funding it, but not necessarily because they're the best things to do. And it's still very much a real conversation. But I mean, some to Fred's point, I think for us and for Kula, our theory of change has clarified a lot over the years. I think even when I joined Kula, we had a loose theory of change, but it was so relationally focused. And that's something that drew me to Kula is from the very beginning, we had a robust Rwandan team, and it was built off of so many just conversations with farmers and farming communities that was just very much listening, very much just asking what they needed, and then figuring out if we could respond. And I'd say to the credit of Kula and our community, there weren't donors that had a clear, their own ideas of what needed to be funded. They were very open to just hearing what we were hearing from farmers and addressing those needs. And so I think that built the early days of Kula, and then over time we've been able to clarify more and more what we've learned and put it into more of a theory of change. But it is still like a consistent, continuous process of reiterating and getting a feedback loop and checking our reality, our impact data with our theory of change and with the conversations with our communities that we work with, and always having staff fully embedded in those communities so that there is that constant feedback loop. And then challenging that, and again, luckily, I wouldn't say that we've had any of those heavy-handed donors that say like, there's a very specific thing and it better work or else, and don't tell us otherwise. I think that we've been lucky to have fairly open, flexible, supportive donors in that process. And maybe we'll continue to experience challenges in that as we grow, but up to this point, I'd say we've been pretty lucky to have great partners.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the classic grant problem, right? Mm-hmm. The grant gets outlined in 150 pages, and this is what needs to be done, and this is what we want to happen, and then it becomes a 3 to 5 year grant, and then you're having to report basically on, check these boxes of did this happen or did this not happen, when it's lost complete reality of, well, does this matter at all, or is it having any impact? Yeah. You guys seem to have avoided that just kind of by private donors and just kind of getting, working with the right people. I'm sure that's come with saying no to some money as well. Saying we don't do that.
Yeah, I think more and more as we've gotten clear on what we do and don't do, it does mean that, I think getting more confident in who we are and what fits and what doesn't fit.
Yeah. What I can add, I think the smart way to move forward is every grant, every single coin that comes should come to fulfill the scope of our work. Anything that is diverting us from our focus, I think, however much money it may be, I think it's not a right way to move forward, in my opinion.
And I think that's the benefit of from relationships and from experience, then building a theory of change to match that, to then say anything that doesn't connect with this theory of change, our experience and our relationships tell us that doesn't make sense for us as an organization because it doesn't make sense for impact in Rwanda according to what we have learned. And so I think that it has taken us time, but I think that's given us a lot more confidence and clarity on what we say yes and no to.
Yeah. I mean, there's always that tension, right? When you first get started, for sure. And you guys are you 10 years? 10 years old?
2012, so it'll be 13 years this
13
year.
years, yeah. Gosh, I mean, so there's always this tension of when you first get started of, okay, well, we need money in the door in order to operate.
Yeah.
Money can come with strings.
Yeah.
We sort of just need to get to work because if we overanalyze this thing, then nothing will ever happen ever. And so we just need to start working on something. That's how you gain experience. There's a lot of failure in that. You sort of live through that. And then you get to a place where hopefully you have hopefully you survive and then have a clarified mission and you can jump right in. I love that you guys have this iterative approach. I remember, you said 13 years. It must have been 13 to 15 years ago. I met Sarah, she's founder of Kula, and she was visiting a nonprofit I was working at in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And the first time I met her was in the back of a pickup truck in Nicaragua going on like a animal drop-off thing for like some, it's just ridiculous, but it's so cool it's kind of scary, but also so cool to see how everything's evolved since then and move in that. A part of that journey that brought us back together, which who would have thought all these, worlds would, nonprofit and then somehow rejoin with coffee was we started a coffee company. You guys needed a technology solution. We started working with you on that, but you guys took this leap into coffee by investing in a washing station. Was that a good idea?
Wow, that is a fantastic question. What would you say, Fred?
Well, two sides of the coin. I would say it was a good idea to first learn the value chain, the coffee, the process itself. Personally, I was new in the coffee business. I remember like my early days with Kula, I wasn't even taking like the pure black coffee without sugar. I used to put like 5 teaspoons of sugar. So first of all, familiarizing myself with coffee, talking to farmers, knowing the techniques, all the methodologies, the fully washed natural. It was a learning process for me, knowing the sea market, the valuation, the negotiating with the buyers and everything. All those skills were really needed as part of Kula growth. Two, on side of the farmers, I think when we invested in a coffee washing station, specifically where we are operating, there was a need of it. As we moved on, there is a back and forth kind of discussion whether it's making sense to keep exploring more in that in terms of like operation versus the income and
Yeah. I mean, to give context for everybody, right? Because this is, I think, I think in coffee specifically, well, just basically in life or business or whatever you're doing, we kind of get to this like, this kind of theoretical or practical. Oh yeah, it makes sense. We have this. We invested in infrastructure, and we got this coffee. This washing station, you got to take a boat to it, right? Oh, yeah. It's just in the middle. I mean, it's out there, and then I think you guys have told me the story of how you actually acquired it. Would you be comfortable sharing that story a little bit of how you actually got this thing? Like, what was because that was insane, right? There was some crazy process, some auction that you had to participate in, right? To get this thing?
Sure. I mean, I'm trying to think of all the details. It was in 2019, but yeah, I mean, we had first visited this washing station. The owner had wanted to sell. He quoted us a crazy price that was just kind of ridiculous. So we didn't really entertain that. And then a few months later, it went up for auction through, it had been foreclosed by the bank, and it then went up for auction. And so we ended up going back out, and I think because it was so rural and remote, there were not a lot of other buyers interested. But essentially it was like, we went out. There was a local leader that kind of like walked the perimeter of the land with us. There wasn't a lot of officiality to it at the time, but it was kind of like okay, we're going to trust that this is the borders of the land and where it is. And then we're going to make a bid, and it doesn't seem like anybody else is making a counter bid. So I think we got it.
How do you pay for it? What is it?
Cash.
You just pay, yeah.
So we then went to, and there was some official, signing of documents with the bank and with the local authorities. but it was, literally going to a bank and having to call ahead of time to let them know that we were going to need to pull out. Rwanda has rather small bills of cash, so to get the amount of money, we had to have like 2 paper bags full of cash to go get at the bank and then make our payment to then buy this beautiful piece of land that's pictured on your wall, which is amazing.
I put all these up without your permission, so hopefully
there's
no copyright that I need to
you
do
are
that.
permitted. It's beautiful.
So you show up with cash. This is not an uncommon thing, right? Because after you have the washing station, you're paying cash for cherries too, right? Yeah. So there's just enormous. But this is such a bizarre thing, just generally in today's world for people that aren't operating in these environments of, you go to the bank and then you pull out a bunch of cash, put that in sacks, and then you get on a boat and you go across a lake. And then you just give it to a guy, to the auctioneer guy or who do you do this?
I don't know that I remember who we gave it to, I guess. But yeah, there was definitely paper documentation ultimately. Yeah, and I think what's that?
We gave it to the bank people, like the financial institution that was auctioning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they count it in front of you? Is that how it works? Or they just trust that you got enough cash there and they walk away with it?
I don't remember.
Anyway, I just find the whole thing. So this is what I'm talking about, is we get into this kind of thing of, access to market solutions and, higher yield rates. And, you can throw out all these terminologies like, no, you know what it took to get this started? We went to a bank, we got a bunch of cash, and we went out, we walked the land with the leaders of the community, and then we gave the bank foreclosing on this through an auctioneer a bunch of cash to get this thing, and that's how it's and I think it's not pretty.
Right, it's not pretty, and I think that would be my main point from that whole thing, is that's not unusual. It feels wild in some contexts, but a lot of the world of coffee production, that is more normal than not. And especially in a small holding context like Rwanda, and in a country like Rwanda, there is still, even amidst all of the global coffee conversations of 72-hour fermentations and all of the, maturation of the coffee industry, still so much production is being done in these much more rural, some would say unsophisticated, I would say just more normal context and this was pre-COVID. A lot of digitization happened during COVID for sure, but still, a lot of these economies are still working much more in a cash-based, relational-based, handshakes and walking a land than some of the world realizes.
So, and Fred, you were in the middle of this thing, right? You were with Kula at the time?
I was with Kula, but by the time the auction happened, I wasn't there, but I followed up the entire process.
Yeah,
but the specific day I wasn't around.
So you got Nick on one side, Nick and Sarah at the time on one side, right? And they're trying to tell a donor, I'm assuming a donor, to give you a bunch of money. This is what we're going to do. And this is how this is going to work. And then you're on one side. Are you thinking this is normal? Like this is how we have to do it and this makes complete sense? And have to convince them, we go get the cash from the bank and then we just show up on this thing and that's how the transaction occurs?
Well, it was normal depending on where the action happened, because that area has other financial institutions that were not digitalized by then, and it was really hard to withdraw that bunch of money. So that's why we had to go and get cash.
But did you have to, from the Rwandan perspective, was there some convincing that had to go on to say, hey Nick, don't worry about it, it's gonna be fine, this is how this is gonna go?
Yeah, okay, because I wasn't around, I don't know if he was worried, but I think in my opinion, if I would be there, I would be like, this is how it's gonna happen.
And honestly,
just be ready for it.
Be ready for it. At that point, I had been living in Rwanda for 2 years. Nothing, and it's interesting even to be reminded of a more external perspective that is still kind of crazy, but in the context, it doesn't feel that crazy. Is the reality.
Right. Yeah, but I'm sure you're reminded of these issues anytime you talk to a donor.
For sure.
And
for
you just
sure.
are like, hey, because they gave you, I mean, the washing station cost a lot of money. Like they're not giving that away for free, even if you got a heavy discount at an auction, right? And so I'm sure a donor wanted some level of accountability around that. So anyway, very, very interesting. But this is a reality on a day-to-day basis, right? I'm reminded of, we work with a producer in Burundi, and they talk about payday happening, it's like one day a year or like a couple days a year if you're lucky. And they literally fill up, $1 million US in Burundi francs, which is like 1 billion francs, into suitcases, and then drive up with armored trucks, and then pay all the producers all the farmers show up, and they pay them. They pay them they have videos of them paying them on the washing machine equipment, just counting out the bills, and then counting out the bills, and then go on. And this is, so when we talk about getting coffee out of Rwanda, Burundi, East Africa, and these are the realities. So it's not there's no magic way of, oh, well, there's some easy ways for us to have incredible outstretched. No, it's just hard work, right? To get this done. So you guys jump into the coffee business, you buy this washing station, and then you got to convince the community to show up with coffee and start growing this. What were the challenges at that time that you were like, man, we did not see this being a problem? What came up?
Well, I would say the first and foremost was to engage the farmers who are new in the area. The next step was to engage the farmers, to convince them. Actually, that area, Nyamasheke, is one of the densely populated coffee area. And most of the coffee washing stations that worked with that specific region were not that kind of like trustworthy in terms of like promising and fulfilling. So there's this thing in Rwanda called the second payment, known as bonus. So during the season, every coffee washing station is trying to attract the farmers to supply to them, saying, we are giving you the bonus, you are trying to look for the market. At the end of the day, this is the story we had when we got there. They couldn't come back with the second payment. When we landed, they had this kind of trust issues. They're like, you're like others. You're not different from others. We've been hearing all these stories. They're like, okay, at least try us. This is our first year working with you. For us, we'll not promise you what we cannot deliver. We'll promise you less, but if means allows, we provide more. So for those who trusted us in the first year, we operated and we provided the bonus for the very first time. We provided the highest ever paid bonus, around 129 francs per kg as a second payment. And all the farmers were super excited. They were like, yeah, you're right, you're different from others. That's how we started building the good rapport and good relationship with the farmers.
Sure. So, I mean, when you first were getting this washing station, was it kind of a build it and they will come sort of thought of, oh, we have this thing. It's in the middle of the community. Surely everyone's just going to start bringing us coffee. And then, coffee, no, we got to go sell the community on this.
Before operation, there was a renovation of coffee washing station. When we bought the coffee washing station in auction, there was like 90% we had to renovate the coffee washing station. So most of the means of transport is the water transport with the boats. So again, getting the materials would delay, would be challenging. Being new in an area, talking to people. Every area you need to learn the techniques, the way the people react, the way they think. If they say it's 1 hour, is it 1 hour? Is it 1 hour and 30 minutes? So you need to learn how the people communicate in that specific area. So it was a little bit challenging as well to renovate the coffee washing station and have it finalized on time before even moving deeper into the farmer relationship.
It wasn't ready the first harvest, was it?
It took you some time. We bought it in 2019, and we started operating in 2020 to like a limited capacity, but I think we bought it early 2019, and it took close to a year to get it ready. So yeah, I think we might have bought it during harvest in 2019 and definitely didn't operate until harvest 2020. But it wasn't an area that, there was a lot of coffee farmers around. They had supply to that washing station previously, but that then the owner, ultimately didn't end up paying them for the last season that they did operate, and then the washing station hadn't operated for a few years and had kind of gone to disarray a bit. So we need to do some renovations, and then for sure build back some of that trust to say, we are a trustworthy partner. We are going to pay, and I think best practice is, pay every day when the farmer delivers as much as possible. This other owner had said, I'll pay you at the end of the season, I'll pay you at the end of the season, and then never ended up paying. And, a number of things happened to where ultimately he had to foreclose on, or the bank foreclosed on that property. But
so you bought a washing station, but you also sort of inherently sort of purchased almost maybe a bad reputation in the community that you had to overcome to say, hey, we aren't the old owners.
For sure.
Yes, it's the same washing station, but this is a different deal.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, you can't know that until you are actually trying to do business, right?
Yeah. I will say that it's interesting because, and this has changed more recently and we can chat more about it, but, at the time there was more strict zoning regulations. So, and it's a bit fuzzy, but technically washing stations are required to buy from a specific zone, and farmers are, supposed to supply to their washing station as well. There were some ways around that, but farmers were definitely encouraged to provide their cherries to that washing station. At the same time, there were some trust issues that were, pushing farmers to take their cherries elsewhere, even if it was kind of sneaking, but to get around those zoning regulations to a partner that they could trust more. So there was work for us to do on that.
Walk us through that a little bit, because Rwanda's unique in this aspect. I mean, first, I do think that it is worth saying that, farmers are often looked at as victims, or they're, that sort of thing. And I think that, there is some, unfair price negotiations pushing price downs, but there is agency. I mean, if one washing station is offering a higher price than another washing station, the farmer's going to go to that washing station. There's some market there that operates, and farmers they're not dumb. They're going to go highest price, best value, most assured way of getting paid. And that's just a part of the ecosystem. So, but that is incredibly difficult. The regulation in Rwanda around coffee, there is reason for it. But it seems, not quite a free market approach, or maybe edging towards that. Walk us through kind of how do farmers get paid, and what's the requirements around going to a specific washing station? How's that evolved over the years?
Yeah. And I think, for both of us, we've only worked in Rwanda's context. So it's always interesting I know that it's unique. I also don't fully know how to compare it to others. Never experienced an auction type of format. But I believe it was in 2016 that they set a minimum set price. Is that true, that 2016? Right. That NIAB started setting, annual minimum floor price each year. And that has changed every year. And I will say it's only increased every year since then. But every year for cherries. So NIAB, Rwanda's National Agriculture Export Board, sets a floor minimum cherry price that is based off some formulas around the C market and various things that go into that. But that, is a very much enforced minimum set price that washing stations pay farmers, should be on a daily basis. There's some negotiations that can go on between farmers and washing stations. But and then with that, historically, there were zoning restrictions as well that said there's 340, around that permitted washing stations throughout the country. Each one of those washing stations has a geographical zone with a certain number of farmers and trees in that area. And historically, washing stations were not allowed to actively seek buying cherries outside of their zone. farmers could go out of their zone to sell to another washing station if they could get a higher price, but washing stations were not allowed to actively send agents to other zones to recruit those farmers or to recruit those cherries. So there was quite a bit of structure and restriction to it.
And this was independent of the quality of the coffee business running the mill, right?
Right.
It's just, hey, you've got one of these license. It doesn't matter if you're Kula selling direct to specialty coffee roasters in the U.S. or your goal is more commercial, selling to traders, and you're abusive to farmers or whatever's going on. It's just you own that license in that thing, and there's not real accountability around that, right?
Yeah, permits could get revoked or suspended, usually if just their infrastructure was really poor and they were producing really low quality or didn't really have the infrastructure to function, or if they weren't getting adequate operating capital realistically, because that would happen often. A washing station wouldn't operate for a year because they couldn't get the financing for it. Yeah. But yeah, essentially it was kind of like, this is your station, and that's
your area.
That's your area.
So that's the letter of the law, Fred. But then these farmers, obviously, I'm sure they care about the law like everyone does, but they would move beyond the borders of that and go to other washing stations if they felt that one washing station wasn't a good partner or not paying good price or whatever. Exactly. There was some fluidity of flow of coffee, right?
Actually, the idea of zoning, when the NAEB thought about it, it was a way of like bringing more support to the farmers. So in order to do that, each coffee washing station was assigned to a certain number of farmers in a certain cell. Let me say maybe 1,000 farmers. Number one, every coffee washing station was supposed to prepare seedlings, because currently all the coffee that is in Rwanda were planted back in early 90s. So the harvest, there's no optimization in the harvest. They are under-harvested. The farmers are under-harvested. To control that, coffee washing stations were assigned to provide the seedlings, were assigned to provide the farm-based practices. That's why they're like, now, since you've done all this number of job to the farmers, they are supposed to deliver to your coffee washing stations. But not all the coffee washing stations could comply with that. That's why you could find that there is a kind of like price fluctuations. Farmers are not happy with where they are assigned. They can go to another coffee washing stations where they feel like they got supported during off season, or they are getting more prices compared to where they are assigned.
Yeah, the interesting thing in Rwanda to me is that, having a fixed market like that, where you have, 320 washing stations? So you guys said around that sort of thing. You think that would be a good idea for all those reasons. This is your community, invest in your community. These are some of the things you need to do: grow seedlings, work with your farmers more intentionally. They will then take coffee to you. I'm sure if a washing station is offering a better price elsewhere, that even if someone gave them seedlings prior, they would want to go get the better price, right? So this whole thing kind of starts to shift and fall apart as people move beyond that floor price. Are there big moves beyond the floor price? At that time, I think there were, but then the floor price tripled over a couple of years, right?
And there's still big moves. I mean, right now, this year, the floor price is...
NAEB's minimum farm gate was 600 when I left, but in some places, it's more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, every year for the last few years, the actual price still tends to go 20 to 30% above the floor price.
Well, now, I mean, with the seed market price, where it is, bumping up against $4 per pound, how does that impact does the floor price double effectively? Like, it moves me on the 20, 30% bump this year and double just because that variable is so heavily weighted in establishing it. Is that what you expect to happen?
We'll see. It hasn't, I don't think it would double. I would be very surprised if it doubled, but it definitely will keep increasing.
Yeah, it will.
Do you think it'll double?
Not really, but it will keep increasing.
Yeah.
There's a limited supply of coffee in Rwanda, I guess is the point too. And these washing stations have contracts they can fulfill, and they can, if the way to get more coffee is to acquire more washing stations, and that's the fair way to do it, that's really expensive. versus just saying, hey, I think I might be able to attract more farmers to my area if I pay higher prices.
Yeah.
How much do you see in the, just washing stations saying, okay, I've got a bunch of money. I'm just going to increase my prices and drive all these other washing stations out of business
100%.
and then consume that farmer network. How much do you see of that tactic?
I'd say we see it a lot. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree, but that's not a sustainable solution. I would say, in my opinion, with the experience in the running coffee washing stations, there is a need of collective actions for all coffee washing stations in Rwanda to pay much attention to the farmer needs, because at the end of the day, we are all going to benefit. If the farmers are taking good care of more than the prices, only like if the farm-based practices are implemented across the board, and it becomes an initiative of every coffee washing station owner in Rwanda, will have enough harvest in Rwanda and don't be even competing for what is not there. The whole issue of price fluctuation is because the harvest is insufficient and the coffee washing stations are more than what is available.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of cooperation around washing stations, or is it more cutthroat than that?
It's a competition. They are business people. They are competing. But I think, of course, as the government through the Rwanda Agriculture Export Board, as the body that governs all the export, it's their responsibilities to put all the coffee actors together and assign them the responsibility. Then they go ahead and even put some specific measures to the steps to implement the policies.
Well, I mean, there's, amongst all those washing stations, 340, whatever it is, about half are owned by a few companies, and the other half are more the independents. And I think there's definitely a divide. The bigger companies that have longer term established contracts that, they really feel confident about, they can more easily feel confident about paying high prices to get all the volume that they need, and the other more independents tend to be left a little bit challenged in knowing when and how to match those prices and what actually makes sense for them. So yeah, and then I think in terms of the collaboration, I do think that there is some, localized within a region, some competition. I know in the last couple of seasons, there's been competition to a point, and then it's okay, we all need to sit down together and agree that we're going to stop increasingly compete with each other, because this is helping nobody. We're just inflation. I mean, the counter to that is I guess farmers are benefiting from it, and so you can be happy on that end. But for washing stations and for long-term sustainability, if we're just paying higher and higher in prices because we have to compete with the bigger companies, but we don't yet know if we have buyers to actually pay those prices, we're not going to survive, and that's ultimately going to hurt the farmers because they might not have a washing station to sell to next year. Yeah,
the whole supply chain needs to be somewhat sustainable. And you guys are an important cog in that machine, right? Yeah. You can't get coffee to market without running it through a washing station. Right. If the washing station doesn't exist, then there is no access to market, right? It has to be processed. I mean, I found what is sort of interesting in Rwanda, just learning from you guys over the years and from other Rwandan producers, is people talk about, coffee farmers are getting paid an unfairly low price. And it's almost the reverse is happening sort of in Rwanda, where it's limited quantity, so you have to compete on price. There is a floor price that the government puts in, which makes it sound like it's illegal to go below this floor price. But what happens in actuality is oh no, that's just where we start the negotiation. Yeah. This is just the anchoring point, and then it just goes up from there, which is, and in some cases, I think over the years, and correct me if I'm wrong, not perfectly legal to pay above that price in Rwanda. I mean, how does that dynamic work?
Yeah. I mean, there have been times that washing stations have been suspended for paying too much, correct? Or
no, they were suspended for violating other coffee washing station zones, not paying too much.
But paying too much and bringing, going after farmers in
Yeah,
other zones
cannibalizing.
with the allure to pay them more than what they're getting there, and then because of drawing those farmers over, then they get penalized. So I think, and that is why, as of last year, they took away those zoning regulations. So essentially now farmers can sell to any washing station, I guess, within a district, and washing stations can buy from any farmer within a district. And then there's transportation realities in that cause, that can be challenging, but I guess they're trying to figure out the right balance of that.
Yeah, so they're not getting shut down for paying too much, but they're getting shut down for paying too much, because you have to pay more in order to cannibalize another washing station's territory.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, well, you're doing that, so we have to shut you down, which then makes you correct your price lower, so you stop attracting other farmers, so you stop. This is where I think the nuance of the whole thing for the people who are buying coffee is sort of interesting of, this is just, you could get in trouble for paying farmers, what seems like for paying farmers too much.
Yeah.
Like that's just what it looks, the optics might be, well, by the letter of the law, you're just attracting farmers from other communities, but effectually it is because you're paying too much. That to me was just like, oh, wow, this is completely outside of what most people think of, coffee producers and the farmers that they purchase from.
Yeah. And again, I personally don't know how to best compare it to other contexts. I think, I would credit NIAB and the Rwandan government in trying to create a system that does provide some assurance and guarantees for farmers. I think it's interesting to be in it and see, when you're benefiting or when you're putting in that price floor to farmers, you're gonna frustrate a lot of washing station owners, some of which are really trying to do best by farmers, but they're thinking about their market realities as well. And you're definitely towing a line between the two. And on one level, I would credit NIAB for trying to get more involved in that whole process than maybe other countries do, but it's definitely not simple and not an easy answer. I will say, for us, going back to our fellowship program, that's why we've kind of focused on yield increases being our best method of impact to see farmers' income increases, because there's so many other things going on from a regulatory environment and buyer environment that it's kind of like we can't really control for, and farmers are getting a base set price that is decent, but they're vastly underproducing on their trees. So if they're getting 1 kg per tree and we can increase that up to 2 or 3 kgs per tree, that's going to be a much more immediate intervention that we can provide and assure to increase their incomes, rather than trying to play and assure these higher market prices that are much more volatile on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting kind of point there too, which, interested in your thoughts on this, Fred, just other washing stations in your area that you might be in competition with, right? Where you guys sort of have an unfair advantage that you have this nonprofit side that kind of operates under the same banner, right? Same employees can sort of operate in different things. So Fred shows up on a farm, I'm representing Kula Project, but I'm also representing Kula's washing station and coffee brand. How did I get out to that farm? Well, somebody donated a bunch of money so I could have a motorcycle and get out there and provide, what's my time paid for? Well, I educate with my time. I provide inputs with that time, that sort of thing. What's been the reaction from other washing stations of, hey, this is sort of an unfair competitive advantage of attracting farmers to Kula's washing station, right? Have you had to deal with any kind of pushback on that?
Yeah, in the past, we kind of had such a kind of challenge. Whenever Kula could do good in the community, sometimes we could steal the credit. The credit could be for coffee washing station. Whenever the coffee washing station could do something bad, the blame could go to Kula. So on management level, we sort of dividing the two. The coffee washing station entity is just as an independent, operating independently, and we try to divide it. Staff, they are now assigned, business entity has their own staff who are working independently, and whenever we are having meeting, we try to explain to the farmers not to confuse the two. Whether you supply to coffee washing station or not, once you meet the criteria for Kula, fellowship, you can just join the Kula. We are not going to hold against you because you didn't supply to the coffee washing station. Even starting in the next fellowship, we are even working from a new area that is totally different from where the coffee washing station facility is built.
Yeah, I'd say, our program is washing station agnostic in the sense of, even when we purchased the washing station, we were operating in 2 other regions with farmers that were delivering to a different washing station. And now we've worked with most of the farmers in that area around our washing station. So our program is moving to another region. And we're really, from day one, that's been our intention and our communication. Sometimes, it can be confusing for folks, but really wanting to communicate, we're supporting farmers regardless of what washing station you're delivering to. In one area, we're also providing that washing station market to access and involved in the value chain. But in every other area, those farmers are increasing their yields and bringing that production to other washing stations. So, our focus really is farmer support regardless of where their access point is.
Yeah.
And we've got some credits from other fellows who are running coffee washing stations because some of their farmers are in Kula Fellowship. So whenever we are meeting, they're like, oh, you supported our farmers. Now we are getting the good cult of coffee because we have a couple of fellows who went through your fellowship. Now they've mastered the farm-based practices. They're even teaching others. So we took that as we as a credit for explaining properly and fully to other people in the businesses. But that was not the case when we started. They were thinking we are tricking them. We are just using Kula as an umbrella to try to steal all the farmers because the zoning thing was still there.
Yeah.
But now they fully understood it.
Yeah, well, it does sound like some evolution had to happen to create a clean separation of church and state between the washing station and the nonprofit side. And again, a lot of that wouldn't have happened if you didn't just get started. I would be curious from your perspective, and I'm sure maybe you've gotten asked this question before by others, but what advice would you have for nonprofits that want to invest in coffee or invest in washing stations as like a subset of their, like, we'll create this for-profit entity under us, or just people in general who want to go out and buy a washing station? What advice would you have for these kinds of folks?
Yes, sir.
I would say first sit down and clearly define the goal for running a coffee washing station. Is it by learning? Is it for profit? 2, define how you're going to access the operation fund because that's the major issue, and probably if you can go extra mile, try to negotiate market ahead of the time. That's the only way you'll be able to sustain, because from my perspective, from my opinion, nonprofit runs on the donations, which are not very streamlined. They are there today, tomorrow they may not be there, and nonprofit cash flow may be affected during the season. So the moment you start working, you want to have a side business of running a coffee washing station, define the 2 aspects: the cash flow or during the season, the market, and how you're going to communicate to the stakeholders, to the people you're serving. Those are the major 3 important things, in my opinion.
I love it. Yeah. So before you get a washing station, maybe build out the market side first, because you could get coffee and then sell it on contracts, right? So build out the market. Is it learning or is it for profit if you're going to jump in? And then understand that cash flow in a nonprofit and how you get literally income in a nonprofit is very different than how you get it for a for-profit, right? A lot of these nonprofits, I'm sure, wouldn't understand credit facilities and wouldn't understand equity and wouldn't understand debt. I mean, you're entering into a whole new world, right? So would you tell them starting out to do it or not do it in your first meeting if they were asking you this?
They need to first figure out what I've mentioned. Maybe Nick can talk more about that, because
I think you're looking for a black and white answer, and I don't think that's not the right way to do it. But yeah, I would say we have learned so much. I think both Fred and I, oftentimes when we talk about the challenges, I think there is a piece of it for both of us that just thoroughly enjoy it and enjoy the challenges. And I think if that's the case for folks, then do it. I think it definitely has not been as, not that we thought it would be easy, but it's definitely been more challenging and not as quickly tangibly beneficial for the growth of the organization in terms of finances and profit. So I'm like, if you're looking for quick profit, maybe don't do it. But if you're looking to engage in something that is really fascinating and learn a lot, I think consistently we've gone back to we are learning a ton, and that is awesome. Are we bringing some value to farmers? Yes. Is there a pathway that ultimately it can be profitable to bring more profit to to the nonprofit side and to drive our fellowship program forward? Yes. So let's keep doing it. Yeah. But it is challenging and it is complicated and there's a lot to learn. But I think if you're not going to enjoy the learning process, then don't do it.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Well, the last thing I usually ask people on this, and I'm going to add another. I haven't done this before, but I'll add another. But last question I usually ask, this will be the second to last one for you guys, is just what do you? There's so much kind of negativity in the industry of and people spin on that, especially in things like this. It's just really easy to talk about all the things going wrong and really unusual or rare to talk about all the things that could go right. And I would be just curious from you guys of what are you optimistic about kind of the Rwandan coffee industry or, Kula's coffee project?
Yeah. And I think just off the top, I would say, we're seeing impact clearly of farmers actually, tripling their income significantly, doubling their harvest production, seeing more revenue streams developed, and actually seeing households get out of poverty. And so, taking it back to that level, that's what our primary focus is, and that's what we're seeing. And, after every fellowship, as hundreds of households go through it, and we see that impact happen, that's one more piece of Rwanda's overall development and growth as a country. And it's very much in line with the bigger picture vision that Rwanda has for its growth and development of moving into being a middle income country. And I think it's really exciting and energizing to be a part of that growth. I think Rwanda is an exciting place to see a country in real time developing, and for everyone in the country to be taking ownership of that process is really exciting, and to be able to bring that even into a coffee context around a crop and a drink that we love and can actually experience the tangible aspects of it. I think that's super exciting.
Yeah, what I would say that I'm optimistic about the coffee industry in Rwanda is growing. In the last 5 years, so many coffee shops have been emerging with trained personnel and standard equipment. So I think Rwandans are picking up the habit of drinking coffee. If you walk in a coffee shop, you find a number of folks sitting, discussion, having meetings over a cup of coffee. It's something that is to be proud of, and I think if it continues at this pace, I feel like maybe 5 years, 10 years down the road, we get to the level of Ethiopia where we consume majority of what you're producing, which will resolve a lot of these market issues.
I love it. Yeah. So the one I'm tacking on here, just to wrap this up, is maybe for our podcast in the future, or even kind of sourcing some ideas to answer some questions, because I know I'm asking a lot of questions to you guys today. Is there any kind of, if you could have one question answered, what would that question be? And coffee specific, is there anything that's kind of really pressing on your mind, or you guys are struggling with at washing station level, or just Kula coffee in general?
I think where my mind first goes, I don't know if it's the struggling, but I think I would still love, and I don't know what the question is here, but some comparative analysis of coffee context, country by country. I don't know if that's the best way to slice it, but a better way for even coffee producers to see themselves comparative to other producing countries. And again, I always talk about how complex it is, and that is true. I'm what if it could be less complex? Like, what are the ways that we can find the through lines more easily and find more of the similarities and the overlaps with other producers in a way that, you know, builds collaboration in that. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would say the question that always comes to me is how best as the actors who are in the coffee businesses in Rwandan perspective can work together to focus on farmers' support, because the farmer is at the center of this business we are doing, and it is unfortunate that a farmer is receiving less. However much you are saying that you are competing with the prices, still less compared to the input the farmer has to incur. How best can we support in a very streamlined the farmer to trigger the youth in the coffee businesses? Because a majority of the farmers are old. Youth need quick money. They don't want to spend 3 years waiting for the coffee. How can we, as the business people who are in this coffee sector, nurture the youth to become coffee farmers with a very streamlined, with a very prospective kind of like profit?
Yeah. Those are both great questions. I'll be thinking about those and potentially try and find a next guest who can maybe dig into that and answer those a little bit more. But I suspect that no one out there has a clear answer to that yet. So it might just be something we work on together. Appreciate you guys coming in today and being here in person in London. This was such a kind of a throw on when I think I saw a LinkedIn post that Nick, you were coming to the UK, and Fred for this School Foundation in Oxford event. So the fact that this worked out is amazing. You guys were one of our first customers at M-Cultivo, which been awesome working with you guys just over the last several years, seeing coffee grow in kind of the Kula ecosystem and being able to play a small role in that. We're just so grateful to you guys for allowing us to take part in that. And I would say for anybody out there looking for Kula coffee as well, you guys do have a roasted brand in the US, correct?
Currently, we're doing all of that through Prevail Coffee. I'll shout out Prevail. So the best way to get our coffee roasted is through one of our roaster partners, and currently Prevail is kind of our cornerstone partner based out of Montgomery, Alabama. And all of the Nyamasheke, Rwanda that they provide is from the washing station that we've been talking about in Nyamasheke in Western Rwanda on beautiful Lake Kivu. And that's a good way.
And there's also roasters, obviously, out there. There's green coffee available.
Absolutely.
As well from you guys.
We're in harvest. Harvest season started just a few weeks ago. And so the next few months we'll be harvesting and processing, and we'll have samples ready to go here in a few weeks.
Yeah. Get contracts together.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I will say too, just one shout out to M-Cultivo, is that when we talk about like building that trust with the farmers in the area, a big piece of that was the traceability platform and sending SMS receipts. I mean, you talk about kind of shifting from more just purely, cash and written receipts. One significant shift was being able to track every transaction in a platform and having farmers receive an SMS receipt. And they've talked so much about how much that built their confidence and their trust in us as an organization and as a company. And so
it's been really it's been really cool to see, through just our platform that we're processing, over 100,000 transactions in East Africa a year between farmers and washing stations, and getting that receipt out there. I remember, quick anecdote. I remember you guys, I think it was you guys who called us and you were like, hey, the SMS receipts aren't going out and the farmers are not happy about this.
Yes,
and the problem was a cell tower went down. And, we did some research and figured it's just and so it was just sort of the situation where we can't help with the Rwandan cell tower infrastructure. If you can't send an SMS, we can't send an SMS. But it shows the importance of transparency, and you guys have taken that step to kind of be fully transparent with farmers, make sure there's good accounting for every transaction that's paid in cash, and then be upfront with them and building that trusting relationship. I think it builds better long-term businesses, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, good on you guys. So anyway, thank you everybody. So thanks to Nick, thanks to Fred for being here today, and yeah, definitely check out Kula. I guess we'll put kulaproject.org and contact Nick and Fred. Contract some coffee, some good Rwandan coffee. All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much for hosting us.